The worst Halloween hide and seek ever. This one has illustrations. Unfortunately, my husband Jim and I own an antique business in a big old bizarre barn of a building. 5 floors. Multiple other tenants including a restaurant. Halloween was a Monday last year. We locked up the business at 5 p.m., and we went to an early dinner across town. Then we got a call from Sonitrol, our security monitoring company, at 6:30. A motion detect on the lower level. Then another. We left in a tearing hurry, but figured it's a bird. Or a rat. We don't have rats, but you know, something. Maybe a cat. It's way too early for a break-in. After all, I went inside the main level upstairs and disarmed the alarm. And started fumbling noisily with the keys and the big iron gate, one of many that separate the floors at night. Jim checked the perimeter outside for signs of a break-in. Nothing. Doors and windows intact. Definitely, absolutely a bird. Or a rat. Or a cat. Dusk was long gone. The shadows had settled in and taken over. Just wardrobes loomed in the dark. Wardrobes and nothing more. Right, I headed down below to the location of the alarm, trusting Jim would follow. After all, it was a rat. Or a cat. Or a bird. I am accustomed to the building after dark, so I just turned on my phone light, not the overheads, and walked around boldly like I own the place. I looked in the corner with the motion detector. Nothing, just its red eye blinking mindlessly at me. No rats, no cats, no birds. I turned and went the other way while Jim poked around a few aisles over, and there it was. A fucking burglary kit sitting in the middle of the floor. Bolt cutters, a fire extinguisher, just sitting there, waiting. I have never gotten a bigger case of sheer terror so fast. After all, there was no broken window or door. So he was still there. In the dark. With me. I hissed Jim, "Jim, Jim, please, please, please," and he didn't hear me. I literally couldn't scream, just like in those stupid goddamn dreams. My voice stuck. Just me, the spotlit burglary tools, and a hostile presence lurking in the dusty shadows watching while I whispered for someone to save me. Finally, 1,000 years or maybe 10 seconds later, Jim wondered why I had taken root in the hallway and came to see. He saw what I was frozen pointing at, and was like, "Oh fuck." We bolted out the front door to call 911, and wait. And we abandoned the building to the burglar. An eternal 5 minutes later the police showed up and were initially pretty unimpressed with our find of the crowbar and fire extinguisher. Until we pulled up the security footage that revealed the actual horror. The face of my new sleep paralysis demon. So, this guy. As is obvious, he is built like a lean, mean, brick shithouse. He'd crouched on a landing behind a bookcase when we closed, and watched me and my staff lock up. Bided his time. Then, calm as could be, he walked out and went to the men's restroom in the hallway downstairs. That area isn't set for motion detect for a variety of reasons. He spent a while in there moving around with the door open. He constructed the mask using one of ours, and a fake flower wreath to hold it on. Purple plastic clematis. He looked right into the camera barefaced, and then put the mask on, stared at it fixedly in his mask for a time and finally pulled his gloves on. He stacked a few solid body vintage suitcases in front of a tall iron gate and hopped right over like it was nothing. He ran down the hall, triggering the 6:30 silent alarm, and looped the floor. He ran back into the hall. And moved a ladder to hop back to the other side of the gate and, bizarrely, just repeated this whole thing a few times. Then he went to the basement. Wormed over a 15-inch gap over yet another iron gate. See the bottom pic of the above imager link for a view of said gate. Back to the hall again. Stared into the camera more, repeat. He was moving fast, up and over, back and forth, upstairs and downstairs. Parkour style almost. Then he got the tools out and peeled apart one of our steel lock boxes with the crowbar, and stole a handful of our keys to access showcases. At this point he heard me fumbling with the gate and keys upstairs. He ditched the stolen keys and tools and hid. Watching me while he waited in the dark, we exited to call 911, and he ran back to the basement. In the basement there is access to a dirt tunnel that circles the perimeter of the building. He broke the door open and entered. Spiders the size of dinner plates live in there. He had no light. It's muddy and dank. It's, in a word, petrifying. There is a tiny exit hatch, if you walk the whole thing and take the multiple turns, that dumps you into the busy kitchen of a restaurant, whereupon one would need to stroll past the line cooks, out into the restaurant proper, with cameras, and then one could leave their front door. Plastered with mud, which does leave tracks, speaking from experience. When we found it, there was his clear entrance into the tunnel but no exit tracks. No muddy footprints, nobody walking out on the restaurant cameras, and the cooks noticed nothing. It was a busy night though, reviewing the footage, timing it all, tracing his path from camera to camera and searching the building carefully took hours. By the end, all of us including the police were starting to lose our collective cool and freak out. There was no chill, when even the guys with guns were rattled. After all, where the fuck did he go? Jim and the two officers had no choice but to walk the dirt tunnel. The cops took one look and were like, absolutely not. Jim insisted, and so they made him walk point. They made it about half the tunnel before the cops were like, fuck no, you are leaving with us and we're gonna review more footage from the restaurant where there are no spiders and fuck this. Jim got the okay from them to board up both ends of the tunnel. Which he did, solidly, and thus the story ends. The pictures got spread widely but we got no useful leads despite the decent face shot. Did he indeed crawl out a hatch in the busy kitchen and stroll out past the cooks, leaving no trace of mud? I guess. We got no suspicious smells coming out of the tunnel in later weeks and months, but nobody has walked the far side since. We only unboarded the tunnel last week for the split water main shenanigans. I have vowed I will use his skull in this year's Halloween display if he's dead down there. Be careful who you open your door to on Halloween. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone, since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out, because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over, because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating. So that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house. And by 10 o'clock, almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we'd eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch, watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home. So I assumed it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole, and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater, because he wasn't wearing a costume, and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly. Gripping his cell phone, the man let out a low grumble, and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police because maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much from the information we had given them, since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt for the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. This means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry, he only had the urge to murder. So to the creepy crackhead Halloween slasher, let's not meet. Pretty sure I was almost lured into a sinister Halloween trap. This just happened a few hours ago. I have called and reported it to the police and I am home safely, but guess I am still in shock. Could do with putting it down in writing to process it, and figured this is as good a place as any to share what happened. I finished work early today and so decided to go out for a run. I set out around 4:30 and decided my usual routes, which cross many roads, will not be very practical, and so I took an alternate route along a canal towpath and some pathways through woods that I knew would be less busy. Everything was going well. I was pushing myself steady until I got to a pathway on the way back around 6 kilometers into the route. It is a long straight path with a canal on the left side, and on their right there is wasteland where some factories used to be but have mostly been demolished. It has been left abandoned for as long as I can remember and is overgrown with trees and weeds, but there are the odd bits of an old factory that for some reason weren't fully demolished. As I got level with one part of the factory, which still had some old metal fire escape steps attached to it, I noticed a rough-looking guy sat on the wall with his legs hanging down. He jumped to his feet as he saw me coming and shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. As I came level to where he was, I heard him say, "Wait there, can you help me find my phone?" He said this while he was running down the steps, and so I stopped as I got level with where the bottom of the steps was, meaning we were standing just a few feet apart but with a fence in between us. It was a really old iron fence with vertical metal bars that have spikes at the top like you sometimes see around churches and things. He asked me if I would help him find his phone again, saying he had dropped it somewhere nearby, and asked if I could ring his number so he could listen for it. I felt I couldn't exactly refuse as my phone was strapped to my arm, so I said he could tell me the number, and I took my phone off my arm and unlocked it. He blurted out a phone number but said it far too fast, and it didn't begin with 07, which made me start to feel like something wasn't right. Although I was beginning to suspect at this point, I wasn't really worried. I am in pretty good shape. Had a big size and weight advantage over him, plus there was a fence between us. He didn't seem in very good physical shape and seemed like he might be homeless. I figured if he was trying to mug me for my phone, his only chance would be if he pulled a knife, so I made sure to stay a good distance away from the fence and kept my eye on where his hands were. So I told him I didn't catch any of the numbers because he said it too quickly, and he came out with another number. This time it did have 07 at the beginning. I entered 7 numbers and then he started to look around and saying, "I can hear it, come and help me look." As he looked around at the ground, I was about to say that I hadn't even finished dialing when a much larger black guy appeared from behind a section of wall to my right. He was also really scruffy looking, and from the look of his eyes, it seemed like he was on drugs. He came out saying he could hear the phone ringing over towards him and beckoned me to come through a gap in the fence and help look. The white guy then said, "It is ringing, yeah," and I told him it was, even though I still hadn't dialed the last digits, and now I was sure they were trying to lure me to come over to that side of the fence. After 2 or 3 times of them both beckoning me to come and help, always insisting they could hear the ring, I heard the black guy say, "He's not going to fall for it." He said it in a hushed way as if he thought I wouldn't hear, but with it being out in the middle of nowhere I could clearly understand what he said. The white guy then started acting quite aggressive and punched a tree, telling me he needed the phone badly and how his whole life was on the phone, telling me to come and help them look for it. While he was punching the tree and ranting, the black guy had taken a few steps away to the right, meaning I couldn't keep my eyes on both at the same time. It was after 5 p.m. by this point and had gotten dark all of a sudden, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. I noticed there was a gap in the fence where some of the bars had been removed right where the black guy was heading, and I decided at that point to get the hell out of there and made a run for it. Neither of them said anything as I ran away, which makes me sure that they had malicious intentions. If they genuinely lost their phone and needed help, I would expect them to shout, "Where are you going?" or something to try and get me to come back, but they didn't shout anything. After sprinting for a good 20 to 30 seconds, I turned to see if they were chasing me. They were both stood on the path around where the gap in the fence had been, but were not chasing me. They were just standing there watching me run away. I continued running away but kept looking back every few seconds until I was out of sight. It was at this point I got off the canal path and onto the roads. The person I spoke to on the phone to report it took my details and the descriptions but seemed to think it wasn't anything worth worrying about, but said it will be investigated. The whole incident has left me a bit unnerved, and I am pretty sure I won't be jogging that route alone anytime soon.